jump into God's Word. Lord, I thank you for bringing us together. I thank you for this six who have given up their summer. Actually, past year for this so working in this camp. Father, I lift them before you even tonight as they have 500-600 as they small groups, 4, 5, 6 children. Help them understand. I lift up for you. Allison, Ash, Saul, awesome. Lord, tonight is best. Is your speak. So let me take a step. All right, John chapter 19. We're looking at the final verdict on Jesus. And in John chapter 19, I'm going to read the first couple verses here, first 7 verses. Pilate then took Jesus and scourged him. So Jesus has been in the midst of this trial. We talked a couple weeks ago about the fact that there were 2 sets of trials. There was a Jewish set of trials, and there were 3 trials in that. Then, after that, there was a set of Roman trials, and there were 3 trials there. He went to a high priest, the former high priest, and then to the religious group of 70 that governed the Jews area for the Jewish trials. He went to Pilate for the Roman trials. He sent him off to Herod, and then he went back to Pilate again. And so that's where we are. We're picking up with this last trial out of 6. These have all taken place between probably 2 a.m. and now maybe 9 in the morning at the latest, something like that. So these trials have been at a very weird time. They've been performed with many illegalities about them. We talked about that last week. So we're in that final trial there. And so Pilate took Jesus and scourged him. And the soldiers twisted together the crown of thorns and put it on his head and put a purple robe on him. And they began to come to him and say, "Hail, King of the Jews," and to give him slaps in the face. Pilate came out again and said to them, "Behold, I am bringing him out so that you may know that I find no guilt in him." So he's talking to the religious crowd who's outside. Jesus then came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. Pilate said to them, "Behold, the man." So the chief priests and the officers saw him and cried out, "Crucify, crucify." Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and crucify him, for I find no guilt in him." The Jews answered him, "We have a law by that he ought to die because he made himself out to be the Son of God." So, what we're looking at tonight is decisions that a lot of people have made. How many of you are somewhat indecisive? It's for people who haven't even determined if they should put their hand up yet or not, right? Am I or not? Okay, let's. There's a lot of decisions we make every day, right? A lot of determinations we make. A lot of them are nonsense and useless and frivolous. But we make decisions in a lot of things. And there's some areas that you're very opinionated. And there's some areas that you're not so opinionated. So I'm going to ask you a series of questions. And I want you to, you'll know there's a right answer to, I think, most of these. Okay? I want you to call out your answer. And see if we all agree on the answer, okay? So, if you have a piece of green candy, should it be flavored lime or apple? Apple.
Apple.
Apple. Correct answer is lime.
Yeah.
Okay. So, if you get a corn dog at the festival, Smith's corn dog, you put one of two toppings on it: ketchup or mustard.
Ketchup.
Throw it in the trash. It's not mayo.
That is not even an option. You're fired. Okay. I know everyone has an opinion on this one. Okay. I think I know the results probably are going to be about 20 to 4. Apple or Android?
Android. Apple.
Telephone.
Android. Apple.
Really, Kenny?
Android.
All right. Okay. 6. Okay, so cilantro, love it or hate it?
Love it.
Cilantro.
Love it.
Tacos. I'm not talking cilantro for this one. Okay. Everyone knows the answer to this one too. Dogs or cats?
Dog.
And last but not least, does pineapple belong on pizza?
No.
Oh, girl is giving it to me, yes.
What?
Everybody on board. Everybody will be good.
So that was the point. Okay, so how many of you got all those questions right? Okay, very good. Good job. So you know what you think about all those unimportant, frivolous, useless things, right? That have no real significance. Okay, here's a problem I had when I was growing up. I thought opinions were facts. I thought opinions were, like, I had a favorite baseball team. Growing up, Cincinnati Reds were my favorite baseball team. Someone else, well, not anymore. So it was a whole different team. I'm really old. The ball wasn't even fully rounded. And I thought anyone who liked the other team that they were playing was wrong. You have to get to the point where you learn that certain things are opinions and they don't matter. And someone told me this, phrased it this way: opinions are like armpits. Everybody's got them, and most of them stink, right? So everybody's got opinions about everything. There's some things that just don't matter in life, but there's some things that are really important. And tonight we're going to look at some of those decisions. Pilate's in the position here of having to make not a frivolous or non-significant decision. He's got a big, heavy decision. He's got to make a determination of what to do in a situation. And he does his best to try to avoid this decision, to transfer the decision to someone else. He sent him off to someone else to have a trial. He even tried to get him to make a different decision. So he's trying everything he's got. He's looking through his leadership manual, Roman Leadership 101. What other options do I have to try to diffuse a horrible situation that I'm stuck in? How can I distract people? How can I not make a decision on this because I don't want to make a decision. But Pilate is only one of many in this passage who are called to make a decision about Jesus. And so tonight, we're going to look at 4 different people or groups that encounter Jesus. And let's look at their responses to Jesus. So we just read this section here. And so one of the prominent people in this whole account is the Jewish leaders. So let's take a look at the Jewish leaders, because they had known of Jesus since the days of John the Baptist. John the Baptist is out baptizing. They had known of Jesus because while they were, they went out to see what was going on. What's all this ruckus about? What's happening? And so they sent people out there to find out what's going on. And at that, at one of those days when they were out there watching, seeing what was happening, kind of keeping an eye on things, John the Baptist points and says, "Behold, the Lamb of God takes away the sin." And John was right in that statement. And what we're reading tonight is that actually come to pass. That actually happened. Jesus is in the process of taking away our sin in those events, in the events we're looking at. But these Jewish leaders made no effort to hide their hatred for Jesus, did they? But why did they hate him so much? What about Jesus made them hate him so much? There are 2 reasons that are really, really evident. First one is that they were jealous of Jesus. A lot of the people in the general population loved Jesus. They loved him for a lot of good reasons, because he cared about them. He spoke to them in a very gentle way. He was interested in them. He poured his life into them. He challenged them.
They also hated him because they were jealous of him, but they couldn't find any dirt on him, so they had to make it up.
And it's easy for a lot of people to find something wrong and point it out and turn people against them. But with Jesus, there's nothing wrong. So it's not like they could turn the people against him. They had nothing. So Jesus taught them. He challenged them. They came away different. They even said in the presence of the Pharisees, and the Pharisees knew they were saying this kind of stuff, he teaches like no one else has before. He teaches as one with authority. But even Pilate knew that the Jews were jealous of that. They were envious of Jesus' popularity, of his acceptance, of his ability to teach, of all these things. And Pilate could even see that. And we read, or we talked about last week in Matthew 27, verse 18, where Pilate knew that Pilate knew that they were trying to hand him over, trying to kill him because of their sin. It says. So another thing they hated about Jesus was he was trying to expose their hypocrisy. He was exposing them for who they really are. They were not religious people who were truly seeking God. They were religious people who wanted power over the people. They wanted to be able to influence people and lord things over people. He exposed their corruption and their greed. He exposed their self-righteousness and their pride. Remember when Jesus turned over the tables in the temple? That was a direct confrontation with these religious leaders. We talked about the trials with two of the high priests, Annas and Caiaphas, were 2 of the guys that were they brought false witnesses before Jesus. They had no evidence, but they put him on trial anyway. They brought him before Pilate with no evidence and no reason. They hated him. One of the reasons was because Jesus had exposed them. They were the ones directly profiting from selling animals and trading money at exorbitant rates. They were making a killing off this whole religion. They were milking the people. The other issue that was exposed by the contrast, in contrast to Jesus' ministry to the Pharisees, was their self-righteousness and their pride. Last week we read that they themselves, in John 18:28, it says, they themselves did not enter into the praetorium where Pilate was, into Pilate's, where he was holding the trial. They wouldn't go in there. Why? So that they would not be defiled, but might eat the Passover. We talked last week about that, the irony in that. I don't want to be defiled by stepping foot into a Gentile's dwelling. But what were they in the process of doing? Trying to get an innocent man. So they were...
didn't try. They were getting an innocent man killed.
Yeah, they were in the process of it, weren't they? Over in Matthew 23, we read this. Then Jesus spoke to the crowds, and he's confronting earlier on in his ministry. These words of Jesus confronting these religious leaders and their hypocrisy and their pride and their self-righteousness. He spoke to the crowds and his disciples, saying, so he's talking to the common people, the regular everyday people. He's calling the Pharisees, scribes out. He says, the scribes and Pharisees have seated themselves in the chair of Moses. Therefore, all that they tell you do and observe, but do not do according to their deeds. So when they read you the Bible, do that. Don't follow their example. Do not do according to their deeds, for they say things and do not do them. They tie up heavy burdens and lay them on men's shoulders. They try to make you feel guilty. They try to put you down. They try to make you put you in a position where you are indebted to them. They try to tie up heavy things and lay them on men's shoulders, but they themselves are unwilling to move them with so much as a finger. They do all their deeds to be noticed by men. Jesus called out the Pharisees, scribes, and they didn't like being exposed. They didn't like being shown for what they were. He goes on in that chapter to say that they're all about impressing others and putting themselves first and putting on others a set of rules that they themselves are unwilling to follow. So these Jews rejected Jesus. And actually in this chapter we see they say, crucify, crucify him. If you jump down to verse 15 of John 19. So they cried out, away with him, crucify him. Pilate said to them, shall I crucify your king? The chief priests, okay, this isn't just one person, this is as a whole, the chief priests answered, we have no king but Caesar. So he handed him over. During the same account, we read that Pilate's like, I don't want to be guilty of killing this innocent man. And listen to what they said in Matthew 27, verse 25, talking about Jesus. These same religious leaders, they just wanted Jesus dead. And then here's what they said. They said, let his blood be on our hands. On our hands. Let his blood be on our children. We will take full responsibility for killing Jesus. Look back. That probably a heavier weight than they thought it was at the moment. Sure it was. So let's look at ourselves in these attitudes, because they rejected Jesus because they had life all figured out. They had a handle on life. Do we ever do that? Do we ever say, I've got this, God, I don't need you now. I don't need you interfering. I don't need your input this time. I've got it. Let me do it my way. Others look around. You might have a friend. Look around and you say, ooh, they are way less spiritual. I'm way better than them. And I can see. Look at their life. Look how they talk about people. Look how they just look how they live. So we put that attitude in our mind. Is that a lot like the Pharisees? We look at it. Sometimes we can look at our devotion to God and we impress ourselves with that. It's easy to fall into that perspective, like the Pharisees. Jesus told a parable about them. He said, essentially, here's kind of sums up their attitude. They will stand in the open and pray, Lord, I thank you that I'm not like that other person. Does that pride ever creep in? That's what's the Pharisees downfall, the pride. Let's take a look at another person in this account, Pilate. So Pilate is the governor of Judea, so the area, Jerusalem and the surrounding area where the Jews live. We've seen a lot about his responses to Jesus, but to sum up Pilate, essentially he had nothing against Jesus. He had no bone to pick with Jesus. He and Jesus were, he had no reason to hate Jesus. He had it out for Jesus. Look at the end of chapter 18 in John. We read one of these verses last week. Pilate, in verse 38, Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" And when he said this, he went out to the Jews and said to them, what did he say in verse 38? Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I find in him no fault at all.
No guilt in him at all. No fault. He is not guilty. There's nothing to pick him up. Now, I talked about using the harmony of the Gospels last week, and essentially, it's just a book that has Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. Here, you put these things together, and you realize that statement that Trey just read is the end of Jesus' first trial to Romans. Then he's sent off to Herod. He comes back. Herod sends him back, and he comes back to Pilate. His second trial begins with verse 39. And in verse 39, he says, "But you have a custom that I release someone for you at the Passover. You wish then that I release for you the king of the Jews?" So they cried out again, saying, "Not this man, but Barabbas." Now, Barabbas was a robber. So what do we know about Pilate here? Well, as I mentioned, he didn't really have a problem with Jesus. First thing we see is he found Jesus not guilty multiple times. He declared, "He is not guilty. I find no guilt in him."
Okay, he seemed, what I would say is he's rather easily influenced.
He is, yeah. He's trying to play the crowd, and we'll see in a minute, he's trying to keep his job too. So he is influenced by the circumstances that he's in. So he found Jesus not guilty. He tried to appease the crowd. He said, "What if I offer you Jesus as the get out of jail free card today? You get every Passover we let someone out of jail. I release someone to you. Why don't I release Jesus?" So he's trying that as a tactic to appease them. They said, "No, we would rather have Barabbas." He wanted to let Jesus go. So verse 1 that we read earlier, let's look at Pilate's attitudes here in verse 1. Pilate then took Jesus and scourged him. He's just said that he's innocent. Why did he scourge him? Why did he have him?
That's what was required.
He's trying to appease the crowd. Maybe if I have him beaten, they'll say, we showed Jesus who crossed and never problem. Jump down to verse 4. Pilate came out again and said to them, "Behold, I am bringing him out to you so that you may know that I find no guilt in him." Look down verse 6. Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and crucify him, for I find no guilt in him." And if you jump down to verse 12. As a result of this, Pilate made efforts to release Jesus. What's Pilate's whole goal in this? No, not guilty, not guilty, not guilty. What if I give you Jesus as the prisoner I released? How else can I release Jesus? What else can I do to release him? He's trying to not make a decision about Jesus. The Jews cried out, saying, if you release this man, you are no friend, this man being Jesus, you are no friend of Caesar's. What do they mean by that? Essentially, we're going to tell on Caesar to Caesar. We're going to tell on.
Yes.
There we go. Yes. Did anybody understand what I meant? We're going to go
tattling the Caesar.
We're going to tattle the Caesar. Thank you. And we're going to get you in trouble. Now, here's the problem: is Pilate had already been in trouble multiple times with Caesar. One more time, and it's probably going to be not a good situation. So he's running scared of the crowd. He's also scared of Jesus. Remember, they said we have a law that says he must die because he's claimed to be God. And at that moment, Pilate was terrified. He's like, I don't want to get involved in killing some guy. I don't know what's going on here. I want no part of it. The other Gospels tell us that Pilate's wife warned him that he should have nothing to do with Jesus because he was righteous. Later, in Matthew 27, Pilate washed his hands of the whole ordeal. He's essentially declaring, his blood is on your hands, not mine. I want nothing to do with it. And so he ceremoniously washed his hands and said, in spite of all this, you jump down to verse 16 of John 19. And what does it say? Pilate handed him over. Why? As I mentioned earlier, he was afraid for his job. Pilate's job was basically to keep peace. Don't let these Jewish people hit the radar in the Roman Empire at all. I don't care what happens there, but as long as nobody's complaining, Pilate's doing a great job. As soon as people start complaining, as soon as there start to be riots, as soon as there starts to be any kind of uprising or problem, Pilate has failed the job. Pilate had nothing against Jesus, but to take a stand for Jesus would have cost him the job. 100% Jesus. No doubt about it. There was no crime. But he declared him guilty and sentenced him to death. So let's take a practical look at this. It's easy to be harsh on Pilate for just giving in to the crowd. You're just going along with the flow. Some of these issues easily play out in our lives, can't they? How much are you willing to risk for Jesus? Are you willing to back down? It might cost. Are you going to stand no matter what it costs, no matter what? Have you been tempted to compromise your integrity? Let me put that a different way. Have you ever known something was wrong and you consciously decided to quit? Does that put us in kind of the same category as Pilate? I know it's wrong, but I don't choose to do it. It's easy to get in that mode of pleasing people around us and not making waves so we can stay on everyone's good side. So, with the Jewish leaders, look at Pilate, let's look at the Roman soldiers. Look how they're described here in verse 2 of chapter 19. These soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head, put a purple robe on him, and they began to come to him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they gave him slaps in the face. In Matthew 27, we read that the soldiers later gambled to see who would win Jesus close. They didn't have any opinion about Jesus either. They didn't have any stake in this. They were just doing their jobs. They're Roman soldiers. They're paid to torture, kill people. They're paid to just do whatever they're told without question. You know anyone like that? Someone who, the Jesus thing, that's just not something. That's not my thing. I used to work with a guy, clearly not a Christian. By his lifestyle, by the way he talked. I loved working together with him because he was very knowledgeable together, and he was very easy to work with. But when it came to his personal life, there was no doubt he was not a Christian. There was no doubt he had no place for God in his life. Anytime anything spiritual would come up, because I made it really clear where I stood on things, and anytime anything spiritual would come up, he would say, "Yeah, me and God, we have this deal. He lets me do my thing, and he does his stuff." Like, I promise you don't have it. God don't make it. That was his way of deflecting, saying, "I don't have any interest in this God. Good where I'm at. I just want to stay where I'm at." Most of you probably would be at a Bible study on a Thursday night if this was your outright attitude, right? If you're just like, I want nothing to do with God. Let me go sit in a Bible study. Let me go hang out with other Christian kids and we're talking about God's Word for a while. That's probably not your outright attitude. But let's look at some other underlying attitudes here by way of application. It's easy to take a casual attitude towards Jesus. There's an older Christian song that talks about the events of the Roman soldier. And it talks about them gambling for Jesus' clothes and mocking him. And the title of the song is Playing Games. Play games for the cross. What does that mean?
Take a long time.
Well, no, but from an attitude perspective, what does it mean? It means that I'm not really a relationship.
Well, for them, he was just another. For the soldiers, he was just another prisoner.
Exactly, he was. And so that there was no spiritual interest, spiritual aspect of it for them in the moment. But the fact that they were playing games, they were gambling. How does that apply to us? Do we take too lightly our relationship with God? Sometimes there's some people, not us, there's some people that might set Jesus aside so they can go live like they want. And then they come back to Jesus when they need him, or when they're ready, or when they're desperate. Right? It's easy to set Jesus aside. Playing games, their relationship. Last person in this account is Barabbas. There's not much said in the Bible about Barabbas. We don't really know how he ultimately responds to Jesus, but we actually kind of know quite a bit about him. He never says anything, but we learn a lot about him. First of all, he was a convicted criminal. He was convicted of insurrection. He was convicted of murder. He was convicted of robbery. And that's what he was being crucified. That was his sentence. He was sentenced to death for these crimes. Insurrection is unforgivable sin in the Roman. You're rising up against the Roman government. We're going to make you pay out of it. His cross was prepared for that outcome. His beating was scheduled. His whipping, scourging was scheduled for that morning. Barabbas deserved death. He deserved his death. But there's three observations about this whole interaction with Barabbas that a lot of authors have pointed out these same things that apply and relate to the situation. First one is Barabbas should have been on the cross because he was guilty. Second one, Barabbas did nothing to earn his pardon. He wasn't getting out on good behavior. He was a full-on criminal that had done nothing right. He deserved penalty. Pardon is completely outside of anything he did. No doubt about that. Barabbas. We know that Barabbas accepted the freedom that was offered to him because Jesus was then kept. The crowd cried for Barabbas to be released. So now they have this murdering, robbing insurrectionist back in their midst because they would rather have him. He was released. He was a free man, but we have no idea what his thoughts were. Think about Barabbas. What a perfect picture of what Jesus did for us. We deserve God's wrath for our sin. It's what wages of sin. We deserve God's wrath. There's nothing about us that makes us worth the forgiveness. We've never earned the forgiveness. We didn't get God's forgiveness because of good behavior, because of our efforts. The other thing is true, brother. Jesus died. Made the title of this message, this section here, the final verdict of Jesus. The Bible says it's appointed to a man once to die, and then the judgment. And you know the one question in judgment, the one most important question: what did you do about Jesus? What did you do about his death and his sacrifice for you? What did you do? So this passage shows us a lot of different encounters and responses to Jesus. The Jews thought they had. Funny thing is, they're like, okay, we're almost done with Jesus. Just a few more hours. Never have to deal with Jesus. It's like, just right? The Jews thought they were in control. They thought they were taking Jesus' life. Pilate knew Jesus was innocent, and he could have made the right choice. You realize that? Pilate could have said, no, he's innocent, I'm releasing him. Pilate did not have to be a participant. Okay, so we got two contrasting facts here. Jesus had to die on this day on the cross. Pilate did not have to be the one Pilate had every opportunity. He had the insight and the information to make the right decision. He chose to not make a decision, about Jesus. But Pilate didn't take his life. The Jews didn't take his life. Jesus said in John 10, he said, no one takes my life. No one will take my life. I lay my life. I lay my life down so that others. For this week, there's 4 things I want to consider. It's a lot. Those of you who like to write everything down, I want to So, 4 things to consider. Do I rank my spiritual level based on other people? Or by God, what God has called me? It's easy to use the wrong standard, isn't it? My job is a Christian. A little bit better. And I've got a lot of work to do. It's easy to use the wrong standard. It's easy to try to justify where we are because someone else is pushing. Do I rank my spiritual level based on other people? Or do I rank it and do I evaluate it based on what God's word? God's word has a clear. Number 2. Consider this. Realize I have to make a choice about how to respond. Think of Pilate. He refused to respond to this decision about Jesus. He put it off. He tried to sidetrack it. He tried to distract people. Oh, look, the distraction. Didn't work. Nothing worked. Finally, he's back in the corner of making a wrong decision about Jesus. Pilate is proof that there's no way in the world about Jesus. Remember, y'all knew all the right answers for all those questions I asked at the beginning? None of you were neutral. None of you were like, whatever. Becky, you like cilantro?
I don't even know what cilantro is.
It's a herb.
The herb. Okay.
I did twice,
yeah. There's no way to be neutral about Jesus. Talked about this several weeks ago. You're as close to God as I am. Think about it. You're as close to God as you decide you want to be. God isn't. There's no one God is hiding from. There's no one God is running away from. If you are not close to God, it's because you've chosen not. And the good news is, you can choose. But you have to make the decision. You can't be like, what's your decision about how close you are to God? What's your decision about what He does? Third, as we think of the Roman soldiers, ask yourself, am I playing game in my relationship with God? Years ago, Marty and I were with this high school guy named Joel. And that song that I mentioned earlier about playing games, that concept, playing games, changed for us. Seriously. It's a matter of convenience. My parents did it, my sister does it, everyone around me, my friends do it. But in that day, in that moment, I decided, listen, I'm done messing around. The guards that were playing, gambling for Jesus clothes, later on, one of them was changed by Jesus. I don't know if it was one once was gambling or not, but Mark 15:39 says there was one centurion, one Roman soldier, who was standing right in front of him, saw the way he breathed his last, and said, truly, this man is the Son. Even the Roman soldiers died. Fourth thing, do I realize because Jesus took my place, I have forgiveness and a right relationship. Do you have any questions about what that means? What it means to have forgiveness? If there's someone a friend of yours, someone in your family that you're trying to help explain that, There's a lot of ways that people reject Jesus. We saw how the Jews rejected Jesus, how Pilate rejected Jesus, how the Roman soldiers rejected Jesus. We don't know what Barabbas did. But no matter where you're at in life, Jesus doesn't call us to. Lord, thank you for bringing us together. It's called our lives to live our lives. You know, take a stand for those times. Take seriously. Convict us in those periods. Give us a burden.